All right. Yeah, like I said, thank you for watching, or for those who are attending live. It's great having you live. Um, we are super passionate about this topic, and most of our conversations throughout the year kind of go in and out of this type of topic. And one of the main reasons why we want to chat about this is oftentimes these questions aren't asked. We do hear these questions. We know that they're a thinking point. Um, Jenna and Raf are here as well with me. My name's Josh, for those who don't know me. Jenna and I are both parents within this program. Raf has 13, 14 years of experience working with families through this process as well. And we really want to kind of reestablish some of the things we do talk about at the start of the year, like setting up the environment for success. And all of these things are great in September and ideal, but how has that evolved? What are the routines and structure within that? How have things kind of potentially slid a little bit, and how can we get that back? But there's a lot of bigger questions that are coming up at this time of year. So we want to kind of chat to those and be like quite vulnerable about what we see, what we recommend, how we progress through, how the data tells a certain story, and how we can really support getting the most out of this program. So thank you for doing this work. And that's not just to the students, like obviously, thank you for coming every day. Thank you for putting your best in. Um, but also to parents and family members. This work is hard. It's not just hard for the students, it's hard for parents. And being a parent of a child with a learning challenge who is in the Aerosmith program traditionally has been in school. So you don't really see it. Whereas like being online, like you're seeing everything and you're supporting often getting your students up and getting them ready to go. So thank you for showing up and helping in that process. Asking students to repetitively complete cognitive tasks that expose their weaknesses isn't easy, but it's a type of work that's remarkably important to remove barriers of learning with independence and capacity. And we find that student happiness and buy-in often come with recognizing how far we've come and giving and taking credit for the hard work it took to get there, and really never losing sight of that process. Um, it's one thing to sit and say like we've come so far, we're done. Thank you for the work you've done, but it's through the process we often fail to give that type of acknowledgement. Like the changes that we're noticing are because you're doing the hard work. You're showing up for that hour a day or 2 hours a day. Some students 4 hours a day to really put that effort in to drive that neuro change. So acknowledging that through the process and relating that back to real life really does go a long way in being retrospective about the progress that we're making. So like I said, the purpose of this presentation is at this time of year, we get a lot of questions around programming, next steps, optimizing outcomes, and we wanted to take time to present you with information to really let you understand and see that a lot of these questions and this way of thinking is very normal. Like a lot of like looking into the future, what's next? How are we going to progress? Like these are big questions to really consider talking about. If we're not asking those questions, we're not really making informed decisions. And sometimes the best decisions we have, we talk ourselves out of because we don't think that's the way we should be thinking about it when really we are thinking the right way. So it's often good to have those conversations, even just to reassure yourself that we are in the right path.
Even just to speak to that, Josh, like there's never a wrong time to ask those questions. Just so if this is something that resonates with you, this is something that, as we go on and we elaborate on this presentation, if there's something that even remotely you think is resonating, don't hesitate. Just get in touch with the teachers or the advisors.
Absolutely. Um, so these are some questions that we kind of went through that we see a lot at this time of year. Coming out of the holiday season with a little bit of an extended break, and then coming into, for most of us, winter, um, that can change how we look at doing any extracurricular activities, right? So for the first time, Aerosmith has really been in your lap where you're seeing that over the last few years since COVID. So we're learning a lot about what families are seeing, what parents are seeing, what students are seeing from that type of lens of work, versus in the past where it's been really isolated in the silo of being in the school. You pick your kid up at the end of the day, or you leave at the end of the day, and your home life is separate. But being for most students, we do have a lot of students that do take a laptop to school and do engage in school. Most of our students are doing this at home in their own time. Um, so we want to kind of address some of the questions of what we see. So what environment is optimal? How do I know when it's time to move on to another exercise, or if it's time to buckle down and attack a weakness with more urgency? How do I support my child through the struggle? Is my child making normal progress? How can I tell if this is working? How do I know if it's time to move on? How do I approach my child's teacher or advisor, or my teacher and advisor, for more support? So we'll kind of dive into these one by one here quickly. So in terms of looking and creating an environment for success, uh, looking at kind of a distracted environment with a solution. So working at a station where other tasks come first and work is secondary. This sounds more psychological. So often if we're working at like a kitchen table, for example, or on your couch where you would normally watch TV, or your bed where you would normally sleep, like, yes, you can get comfortable, you can find a way to do that work, but there's something in the back of your mind that's really saying like other things are done here first. In the kitchen, like I might like try to get up and get a snack. Or if you're on the couch, it's like, well, I'll just put the TV on and I'll start with mute. So like it's just up and I can look up if I need to, uh, and get my work done. And suddenly, okay, I'll just put myself on mute and I'll listen at a low volume to where the TV's just on, right? Or in bed, you might just fall asleep halfway through, which we've had students do, because they're in that environment. So finding a place that's consistently associated with work so that you can sit to work and you're focused on the task. This is quite important. It can be a desk in a room where just that work is done, or homework is done at a table like this. This isn't just for Aerosmith either. This is homework. This is really anything. Business work at home. I know a lot more people are working at home, but finding that environment that's just connected to working on that specific task can really help to improve engagement to finish those tasks. So this is a big one, because we might start at one place and then change to these other areas throughout the year, and not hearing any negative news. So we'll just kind of stay in this area. So in terms of a distracting environment, a workstation that's focused on work is optimal.
Feel free to like loop in your instructors as well. Like, if things aren't going in a certain way or in a desired direction, you might say, look, I'm going to try and work from a different spot today. Do you mind just keeping an eye on my data for the next couple of days and see if anything comes up? Or some clients will even say, oh, for the first couple of days of the week, I really like to work here, and then to finish off the week, there's maybe a different place. And so the right combination may be different from you, different for you, but everyone's got their niche.
So the second one we have here is having other technology in use while working. So Netflix, YouTube, video games, social media, or having on a TV. Like multitasking as a skill really isn't a skill, it's a myth. It uses multiple parts of our brain that aren't focusing on one thing. We all know if we put our nose down and finish one task at a time, we're going to finish that one with more urgency, with more of an ability, rather than splitting our time. And parents know this. Like if I didn't have all of these things to do, everything would be done better. So, but I only have 10% of my energy to put into these few things, and things aren't done at the level we expect, and chaos kind of starts to ensue. And multitasking in that situation is unavoidable, right? But for the most part, when we're trying to do our work and really focus, having technology like this on at the same time can really hurt engagement, hurt focus, and become almost an addictive thing to start checking every now and then. If the environment around us has some noise, it's okay to put on music that you're not checking. So like YouTube, for example, for non-auditory activities, obviously auditory needs to be focused on the listening portion. YouTube, getting music off of YouTube becomes a distraction because you're continually looking for that. But having something that's just like press play, cancel out some of that noise like that, where we've seen no lapse in progress when done correctly. And that's been through research with Barbara Aerosmith as well to kind of determine, can we start playing music? Because I remember an email we got a few years ago saying, yes, it's okay. If engagement's going to be higher because of the environment being distracting and music is actually helping, then it's better than the alternative. But in all other situations, having a game open, having Netflix open, like having a show on in the background, we might enjoy having those things on when we're doing work that's not as urgent. But in terms of this work, which is really cognitive exercise, cognitive training, the brain really needs its best focus on that task as it can, so that it's able to light up that area as much as possible to build that cognition.
Yeah. Talk to your instructors about this too. Like if you're experimenting with music in the background, like say for a child, um, we can give you feedback on how that's going. We can check in with them for yourself as well.
Even
It's
like
really a
folk
team
music.
effort, right? It's hard for us to know what's going on in the background unless we know what's going on in the background.
Another one, like sometimes a novel space is a really good idea. So a workstation that's worn out its welcome can be service for a good change. So change it up. I know I often do this with my workspace just so I have a novel and fresh space to work. Um, you never know what's going to be the best and most optimal space. So if you're seeing that you're getting to some fight or flight response, if the space really isn't working and hurting your back, I know for like us moving online and not like as a teacher, I would not sit. I would be walking around constantly. And then suddenly working online, you are finding yourself sitting, you're getting different types of back pain. And it just like that environment was a negative thing to come in. So I've built myself a treadmill desk. I've got a standing desk that can go up and down so I can mix it up. I have a couch to be able to do reading that I really focus on just doing reading on that couch. So like being able to mix up that environment helps to keep the back strong in that type of environment based on my experience and my needs. But other students occasionally can find this spot is kind of distracting, or my brain thinks about negative things when I'm in this spot because of the experiences I've gone through with doing work that I didn't find enjoyable, right? So as improvements start to be made, sometimes you can get that same addictive feeling of fight or flight coming in and saying like, oh, I don't want to do it because I'm getting to this seat. And when I get to this seat, I know that I'm doing something that isn't my favorite thing to do. Finding a new spot in the house and working together to find a new space that's going to really work can be a good move.
Even like staying in the same space or just changing up your chair. Like I have some students
Totally.
who switched out a normal chair with like an exercise ball. And so one which, there is some movement, and granted the idea is to be bouncing and doing your clocks, maybe when you get a personal best, but that can be a nice, but yeah, even just to switch it up a little bit and you're feeling your body, you're in tune with your body and your physiological responses. Another one which was really neat, I have a student of mine who doesn't really like the typical chair. They tend to kind of fidget and want that movement. There are chairs that you can get that have kind of like a semicircle on the bottom, and they do allow for that movement. And so that's been something that's been, meeting their need for movement, and at the same time kind of calming their body and being able to focus on their work has been really helpful.
So another one, this one isn't so much the physical environment, but a cognitive environment, a brain that's losing steam and motivation. We all have this in all things that we do. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be working on the task anymore. There's we have life outside of this work. We have life outside of our jobs, right? And we can lose motivation based on just being overloaded. And although internal, this is not an optimal state of mind to get the most out of your work. And sometimes a goal is helpful to work towards. So it's nice to be able to set a goal. However, an action plan and how to get there uh, is really important to not make that goal stale. sometimes if we say like, oh, I'm going to work on my parenting, for example, I'm going to become a stronger parent. And if I buy this book and read this book, that's going to change a lot for me. Even if sometimes you buy the book and you're like, I've done enough. I bought the book. I'll read it when I can. I'm doing something to really help out. Sometimes then you read the book. Okay, I've read the book. This is a great book. There's a lot of really good points, but you're not actually putting anything into your life, right? Until you kind of create an action plan and say, okay, these are a few of these really simple steps that I'm going to work on, put these in for that to actually play out. So there's a lot of process that can come in that example of buying the book to that lead up to not really helping the child until you're actually employing some of that, the tips that you're getting. So having an action plan of how we're going to get there is quite vital. And increasing a goal can help when an action plan's in place to increase production. So if we have a student every day, okay, my goal is 10 sets. If they're working on clocks, I'm going to get 10 sets every day, right? Getting to that 10 sets is one thing, but how we're going to get there now, if we increase it, okay, we're going to 12 sets, but I can only do 10 within the 50 minutes that I'm working on this. So how am I going to get up to another 2? How am I going to fit that in? So there has to be kind of an action plan that's created to focus on that. And that could be like, I'm not going to focus on my percentage. I'm just going to focus on my speed to try to get a bit faster. Often when we see that, we actually see the percentage stay up and our brain's kind of holding us back with the need for getting things right and that focus of double checking, triple checking. So an action plan kind of helps us to get out of these stale ways of thinking about what we're doing. And it's super important to discuss this with our teachers or your advisors. Effort for processing is vital to make an improvement on any task in life. Really putting focus into it is very important. And you kind of see that in the example I give of driving a car. Like there's so many functions when you sit down behind the wheel for the first time that you're putting everything in, thoughts going towards every little task you have to do. And it can be overwhelming and typically not the best driver the first time you're going through that process. But later in life, as you get your full license, you're doing all these things naturally. And that's the way the brain learns things. It learns the steps, it creates a fast way to think about it. And we're not taking as much attention or energy towards that task. And for a lot of things in life, that is very important for success because we're not wasting so much energy on the task every time we're doing it. However, to build, we do want to instill that effortful processing. So to be able to get that level of thinking up, that's where mastery goes to a harder level. You're more focused on it with more difficulty, focusing on that brain area to really build it like a muscle that's getting stronger rather than just maintaining. The maintaining can get boring because we stay on the same levels and we're not pushing ourselves. Like if you want to gain muscle and strength, going to the gym is great, but without that action plan, you're not really maximizing what you're able to achieve despite being in that same environment. So the environment can be positive. You can be working towards a goal, but without really an action plan to advance and get effortful processing towards that brain network or any task that you're doing, you're not maximizing on the potential that you have.
That's the benefit of being a part of this program and having the teachers and the advisors is we can constantly help you and hold you accountable to your goals. That conversation before sitting down is very important, right? We will often have that daily with our students, give you a new goal, a new motivation to work towards. And even with my children at home, I find if I just say, okay, it's time to go do your clocks, and without a conversation or, prefacing it or setting goals, they'll just go and kind of mindlessly work through to their goal. Whereas when we have an actual conversation about what are you going for today? Where are you at? What's the progress you're going to make? Like a one-to-one, not even just with the teachers, but with myself as a parent, then they know what they're working for. And then they actually come back and report how they did and what they went for because they were mindful of their actions and their progress that they were going for.
Yeah, like I saw the same type of thing with my son as well. Like we'd been working with him in the mornings before school, and he's losing a little bit of steam. And anyone knows that who knows that teaching their own kids a task sometimes that you would normally put them in a lesson for, sometimes that can create quite a bit of stress. So we made the decision to put him into a class after school instead, this is his second week in his new class. And he's doubling the amount of engagement. He's getting twice the sets in with teachers. So sometimes just changing up that distracting environment can really make a big difference. So how do I know when this is a big one. How do I know when it's time to move on to a different exercise, or time to buckle down to attack a weakness with more urgency? Okay, so when to move on. When we see an area is secure, improvements are being noticed in everyday life, and the student has begun working passively. So we're not seeing that active engagement, and it's becoming just a little bit too easy. We can often see this within an average rating on our assessment, and we do our assessments at the bookends of the academic year. But we can often see students that are working very hard throughout the year, and they just don't really test well. So I don't really hang my hat on like everything needs to be average before we move on. I think you're the expert on yourself as a student or your child to see like, am I seeing behavior that is showing that this area has improved to a point where something else might be more important? And we can see that in the data. So data is suggesting potentially a plateau in the area being worked on, despite good engagement time. So not getting any faster, not getting any more accurate, just steady, good movement across. Because we'll have meetings where we'll meet with a family and really look at the data, and like we're seeing awesome engagement, right? We're not seeing a drop, we're not seeing a plateau. Engagement's working well, it's just taking some time. And when improvements are exposing weaknesses in other areas, changing priorities with a triage approach. So this is triage, like we are working on the most area of most need typically. And as an improvement gets stronger, sometimes the next area up is now showing its weakness. So jumping to that area to really bring them up together, that doesn't mean that you're complete, and we can often jump back to the other exercise. But if another area is really screaming as the priority, then it's definitely worth looking at a new exercise. I think if we've gone through all of these conversations, we've tried a bunch of different ways to look at the exercise, different goal setting, different approaches, different action plans. If all these efforts have been exhausted with both their teacher and through discussion with your advisor, we are happy to switch. But we really want to look at these factors before we move on. So when to buckle down. So our fight or flight response is often triggered when things get tough. And it's our brain's way of protecting us physically or mentally. And I encourage families or students to really think about, like, if you move from, I know for my son, for example, we moved through two hands, and like starting at the start of two hand clocks, my son's 8, so he's still young within this process, or at a lot of the earlier levels. When we got through two hands or onto two hand equal length, especially in timed, there was a lot of fight or flight coming up. As he worked towards improvements there, the fight or flight started to distance itself, and we started noticing a lot of changes. But wouldn't you know it, as soon as we get to three hands, that fight or flight came back. And if you look back to that struggle, as soon as the vulnerability comes up in that moment, your brain is coming in to protect you. And that can be from physical or mental triggers. So what I encourage a lot of families to look at is that same type of fight or flight you're seeing on this new level, mimicking other fight or flight you see within the child's life or within your life. And if that's the case, it's like we've found what to work on, because we've found the region of networks that needs the support. It's similar to like if you're exercising your legs, you're trying to get stronger for like to run a 5K or a 10K or a marathon even. But you see that like I've got this little pull in my hamstring at this time. So you have a couple things to do then. And you can kind of just like stop and rest. Or you can say like, you know what, I'm going to try to stretch this out. I'm going to try to maybe go to physio to see what exercises I can do, or go to the gym to strengthen this area, because your goal is to get to that 5 or 10K. Not to kind of, oh, I found what hurts and now I need to stop, right? We want to target that because we've now exposed where the weakness is, because that weakness, when strengthened, is now not going to hold us back. So if we look at it from that angle of seeing, like, when I see fight or flight, celebrate it. Like I see what's wrong now. I see the area of difficulty. If we can work through this because we're targeting it, that gives us a better chance to be able to come out of this issue. So gradual improvements in the data are showing improvements that are still being made. Like if we're seeing improvements in the data, it's hard to really move on from that or support that. If we're seeing movements in the data, but the question comes like, should we change the activity because we're fighting, or 30 minutes in, we're getting meltdowns, but we're still seeing movement within that. So like if we asked the question last week, we're only at 20 minutes. Now we're at 30 minutes before this comes on. And we can kind of see that process extending. We're seeing improvements within the data. Achievements related to the area are vital towards the goals established with the advisor. So it's really good to fight through if we're really working towards this bigger goal that we've set out within your assessment meeting. So if the goals there are vital towards progress in these areas, it is worth it to exhaust all avenues to really be able to build here. So we do like working through these situations. So if you're feeling any of these types of questions, it is really good to maybe set a meeting with one of us and talk through what we can do and look at the positives behind the behavior, because behavior is often just exposing a need. And if that needs being like a happiness factor, like a needs being met, you're reaching that goal, but sadness or anger or fear often are exposing an emotion or a need.
This is the time of year that we're having a lot of these conversations as well, because we've been at it, since September.
Yeah.
A lot of our students are longer, and now we're hitting the tough spot. And it's often we've finally gotten to that challenging space, right? And in some cases, it might be time to move on. So yeah, like Josh said, don't hesitate to reach out. Great time to have these conversations.
Yeah, and again, this is applicable in outside of Aerosmith, right? Like to know when to leave an environment that might not be healthy versus it's very important to learn the skills that we're learning here, and we have to trust the process that we put ourselves in. So how do I support my child through the struggle? I find being patient and understanding goes a long way. Understanding, like I said at the start, like this work is hard. This work is difficult. We're not expecting this to be an easy process for anyone. And understand that this isn't about you as a parent or disrespect. It's just hard work. And when the fight or flight comes in and you're fighting, especially for vulnerability, things can be said that aren't personal, but it's a way for us to say something that like, this has worked in the past to make my parents angry. And when they get angry, they make me go to my room. And if I go to my room, I'm not sitting on my computer anymore. Like there's a lot of subconscious ways of thinking that can come out in interesting ways. So I find taking like just a step back, taking a deep breath goes a long way. And understanding that like this is a process. This isn't about today. This isn't about yesterday. This isn't about me. This is just about helping provide an environment of support and respect, and understanding that this is a process that we're working towards. Working towards incentive and rewards, like this is not something that comes naturally for me as a parent working with a child in Aerosmith. But I have gotten to the point where sometimes having some type of reward is very meaningful to actually get the work done. And this doesn't mean that you have to be paying your kid or buying video games or anything like that, but like things that they want to do or things that they want to work towards, or not doing as many chores and working away from that. We need to find that motivation. And there's not one thing that we would say, if you start to pay $5 per day every time they reach their goal, like that's not what I would recommend by any means. But finding some type of motivation that they can work towards for for either weekly, daily, or level-wise masteries can refocus at the times when it's very difficult to focus.
It's often a huge help getting through these struggles, because this is a big point to make. Like, the struggle is going to happen. The struggle is normal. So preparing, yourselves for the struggle. What I find in even my students, my own kids, is you don't have to have that reward every single day, like Josh said. But sometimes, the struggle is like, we're actually at a really hard level. We're actually really tired. The students themselves just, they don't feel like they're making progress. So they're frustrated as well, right? I can't do this. I'm never going to make it there. I'm sick of this. This is taking up my time. Like, all of these things come out, and they're going to fight it. But what I find is often just give one, I experiment with the rewards, right? So I'll say, okay, I'm going to try reward today. Let's try this reward and see what happens. And often it just takes once or twice of giving the student a reward that they really want to work for. And then they push for it. And it's that moment of realizing, oh, I can do that. Like, that's what I see, is they're fighting the goal in the fight. But then when you give them something out of the realm of just reach your goal, we're going to earn this today, something little, right? Or we're going to earn this week. And then they do it. And then they experience that feeling of, oh, I can do it. I'm proud. And then you celebrate that within the reward. I find that helps often. And then it's just getting over it. It's that tool to get over that hump of, okay, I can do this now. And then you also have that to say you did it. You can do it. Remember how you felt after you did that, right? It's that empowerment piece for them too. Did you feel proud? Is it easier to feel proud or angry at the end of a session?
Yeah.
And often that reward will just kind of get you over that hump.
Especially if the goal seems unattainable.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can't possibly get to this goal. And like, that's the fight. And if there's an incentive at the end and you realize that you can't actually achieve the goal, even if the incentive's not there next time, they now believe that they can achieve the goal, right? So you can just pick and choose where you put these rewards and really pull them out when you need them.
The same
If
for
your kid,
adults too.
yeah, if you're noticing that they're asking for more and expecting a reward every time, they're getting really good with their reasoning. So you're seeing some cognitive improvements at that stage. But you also now, that can come back to the teachers or the advisors to say, like, what can we do in this situation? How close are we to actually reaching a bigger goal? Because if you're like within a month of reaching a mastery on a level, and we're looking at the data and saying, like, if we keep the trajectory how we're going now, we're going to reach this, it can be easier to make a longer term goal than a need to do every day goal, right? And I find the longer term goals are quite a bit more meaningful when achieved, and you're not reinventing the wheel every day. And it does keep them accountable for their goals at that stage. A big one is being firm with your expectations, and having them understand why they're doing it, what you're expecting of them, and just kind of holding that line. And when that line's held, there's no emotion behind it. It's just, this is the expectation that we hope to get to. If we're not reaching that, then we have discussions. If we're able to reach that, then we're moving on after the hour we're working. So I find that firmness is a good thing to really hold them accountable, and helps in this process when there is a struggle. Often just working with the teacher to understand the language. So you're using the same language at home that they're using in class, and that can change depending on the activity that you're working on. But it's often a good way to see that you're on the same page with the teacher, that everyone's in communication, and using that same language can be very helpful. Being vulnerable about your learning challenges if you've had them in the past, not trying to paint yourself in the corner of everyone. Sometimes there is a feeling intrinsically that I'm the only one doing this. I'm the only one that feels this way. I'm the only one with these struggles. When really that's not the truth. Like, if we show that vulnerability, it does go a long way in making everyone kind of feel equal, and it can provide some good motivation through this process. It's not always the easiest thing to do, but it is very helpful. Go to sleep knowing as a parent that you're doing everything you can for their development. Is there more we could always do? There's more we could do with anything in life. to become better at anything. So we can't just say like there's more that I could be doing. Like as long as you're doing some things, if you are a part of this presentation, you're doing something already for sure. So just be proud of yourself for going through that, especially at this time of the year. You're still in it, you're still going through it. And be proud of that within yourself, because it is worth the struggle. The outcomes for this are important and very helpful for their overall progression in life. So just remember that it's worth the struggle going through. Another big question that we get is my child making normal progress, or like, how's my child really doing? Or how do I know if this is working or not? So we love to meet about this type of thing, because we like going through the data and looking at engagement and seeing the progress and problem solving through that. That's kind of our jam. But it can take time. Like it can take time for a football team to march down the field and score. And we don't expect to score a touchdown on the first or second play. Just because you didn't score yet doesn't mean that you're not making progress towards the end zone. So recognizing that process, because really you are like the frog in boiling water, right? You don't notice that temperature going up because you're there every day. And when you're there every day and you're fighting some of the same fights, it's hard to look at the big picture and see that how far have we actually come. Like, oh, yeah, you're right. We have moved up to 4 hands from 2 hands. And I do remember having conversations when we were on 2 hands about the struggle that we were having at that point. And we did overcome this. Like there's a lot of progress, and that is turning my A's to B, or my B's to A's now. And I am noticing it's easier to pay attention, or I am noticing my child's behavior is improving in some situations where I didn't see that before. So really like sitting back and recognizing that process, because really you're not going to see it first. Other people will see it first, because you're with your child or you're with yourself all the time. So you don't really notice it as quickly as others. There's a number of ways to look at questions. How do I know if this is working? So you can notice improvements in qualitative observations in school and life, improvements in grades, improvements in the ability to attend to and recall information. So it's not just all about
stamina, like being like, sometimes the parents will say, oh, at the end of the day, like my kid used to come home and they were just exhausted, or they're just like they could barely make it through the day, and then now it's like, oh, they're excited to go to school. My kid got up earlier today and they got their like, stacks in their book bag and things like that, and they're coming back and they've got energy to talk in the car about how their day was and things of that nature.
So there's a lot of ways to look at it. It's not just all about the scoring and the average ratings. There are different ways to look at this, and we are adding another assessment tool next year that I'll provide more information about in the future, called Crayos. We'll be doing this assessment every 3 months with students, just to track movement in all cognitive ways, without just needing to rely on one assessment. So we will be able to provide more data, but really some of that qualitative observation is the most important. And then how do I know if it's time to move on? All right, we see a lot of students who don't see the value of the hard work it takes to create this change. However, we also see students that fight through it and make unbelievable changes. And to speak to that, we hear every year families that are past their first year saying how close they were to stopping at one point or another for whatever reason, and how thankful they are that they continued, and thanking us for talking to them about different ways that we could support, or just pushing them to know that this is normal behavior that they're seeing. So we would rather adjust a program for a student than to see them lose this opportunity. And like I said before, this is triage. We need to address the most important need. An improvement in an area can expose other weaknesses, and students can move to another exercise before completing the area that they're working on at that time. So if we are at a point where we really need to change, we're happy to change. But there's a lot of times, like we've talked about, where it's really important just to continue to fight through and recognize the changes. If we need to make changes in the environment or adapt things, just chat with us and we're happy to do that. And like I said, we're Aerosmith parents too. We understand the ups and downs and the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm going to speak to my son a bit, but Jenna, do you want to speak to your daughters going through this and kind of how you saw those improvements and what you're noticing becoming easier?
Sure. Yeah, so I have twins. They're 12, they're in grade 7. We're transitioning to high school next year. So it's been the last 2 years have been kind of a panic for me as a parent and seeing some learning struggles around grade 4, 5-ish. We started seeing them. And so we dove into clocks. I think we've been at clocks for about a year with both of them. I've been pushing one of my daughters a little bit more than the other. It's a fine balance when you're a parent of twins. But one of them's has more prominent learning struggles. And her biggest thing was she just wasn't connecting dots anywhere. She wasn't mindful. She was unorganized, messy. Like in school, I have 2 children, so they're always been in the same class, which gives me a lot of insight. So one of them was bringing home homework and really organized, and agenda was filled out, and the other one was coming home, with nothing. Like this was our first very big struggle, is she would just come home and I'd say, "Do you have homework?" "I don't know." "Do you have your books?" "No, I forgot them." Like, just not organized and not able to hold anything together and be accountable. But thankfully she had her sister who brought it all home, and that kind of made me realize that pieces were missing more, because I have one child coming home with homework or getting things done and being on track, and the other one not. So this is the biggest thing I saw. So we didn't actually see it in academics at first, but within the first probably few months of doing clocks, we'd work through a few levels. I just started to notice little things where this child who was never mindful or thinking ahead, she was starting to plan and organize herself better. It started off as little things, as in, like, she'd be like, "Oh, mom, I'm going to empty the dishwasher," where she's never done that before. So just showed me that, thinking about her actions, or just being ready in the morning before I had to tell her. This was a child that I'd have to talk her through every single step of her organization of the morning. "Have you brushed your teeth yet? You need to get dressed now. Have you had breakfast? Pack your backpack. Do you have your lunch ready?" And these were the first things that I started to notice were coming into place. And that's huge as a parent, when you all of a sudden notice that you're not having to say these things 10,000 times, and she's thinking about them, she's planning ahead, and being organized. And then, homework started to come home. She started asking more questions. Learning is still a struggle for us, so it's not like this big aha moment, but the little pieces are coming into place. This year, the biggest thing that I'm seeing is grade 7 is there's a switch in my daughters, that my one that was actually struggling the most is now more on top of it than her sister, which is kind of huge. She's the one who comes home after school and she's like, "I have my homework." She sits right down, she gets it done. And then now the other one, I'll say, "Okay, well, this one's done her homework. Where's yours?" "Oh, I'll get to it later." So this is kind of like a fantastic thing for us, because she's the one who's getting on top of it. And like, they always now, before I have to ask, say, "I need to study for my test. I have dance tonight. So they'll even say, "I have dance tonight until this time. So can I get my clocks done early?" And just the planning and organization is a huge thing that I'm noticing for them. And they're thinking ahead. Grades are starting to come up on report cards too. We were always students who were kind of just one grade below meeting grade expectations in all areas, except for art, music, and phys ed. Those have always been exceeding for my children. So that's the type of learners they are. But in all academics, we were always just one grade below meeting the expectations. And now we're meeting in most of them. And there's one that we're just off of. So just little things that start growing into bigger things. And we are noticing it. Like, sometimes you naturally just want to say, "Oh, well, they're getting older, they're working harder, they're maturing." But it can't, it's their cognitive capacity growing for sure. Because all of these things started coming into place in the last year. We're still having learning challenges, but I just know, like, fighting through it more. We're hitting the point of that struggle that Josh was talking about. And now I just know pushing through this, bigger struggle will help us get to even more gains. Is that
Yeah, and I think this graphic is really important to see because like this is from Atomic Habits. If you haven't read this book, I very highly recommend it. Um, like the results that are expected over the course of time, we often will have higher expectations than what we're able to reach. And this line is what actually happens. And this valley of disappointment where things aren't working out as well, that it is difficult to get through this process. I know for my son, it would have been so easy. Like we started in July. Um, the summer was awesome. We saw gains in the first
This
month
summer.
in areas that we didn't really expect, like riding a bike. Like he could never do that. Now he could put all these things together and he was loving riding his bike. But we really put him in because he just gets overstimulated and goes to fight or flight when there's things that he can't really manage. And we are starting to see that disappear. And as a 7-year-old, um, going on to 8, it's like, well, he's quite young. The summer was ideal. We noticed this fight or flight improvement, but as soon as he got to 3 hands, it was right back into it. And it would have been so easy to stay in this valley of disappointment where we weren't disappointed, but we weren't at the maximum level yet. Um, it would have been easy just to say, okay, we'll just come back next summer. And if we come back next summer, then uh, we'll just continue on with the progress there. When we saw that fight or flight, it was actually like our clue that we needed him to continue and we wanted to keep going. And I'm so glad that we did because we wouldn't have been getting emails like this from his teacher that I actually just got this week. Wanted to take time to say bravo, well done, parents. Your son's been so happy at school lately, extra happy, no complaining, no frowns, smiles every day. When I briefly mentioned this to your wife on the yard earlier last week, she told me he's doing an hour of clocks every day before school. She kind of said like math. She doesn't really understand what clocks is. We talk about it sometimes. But last week, your son was very excited to tell me about it and share it with the class. It's really making a big difference, a positive difference. Who would have thought that an hour of clocks every morning would have such a positive impact on a child's mental well-being? And then Josh would have thought that's who, because we talked about brain health and I've talked to her about this. But take care and keep me posted. I'll do the same. So had we stopped, I don't think he would have been progressing as quickly as he was and turning C's into A's and improving. And we're very proud of the effort. Like it is a fight. We he puts up a good fight with us, and we like that side of him that really advocates for himself. But this isn't all peaches and roses at home. This is, we're going through it every day, just like many of you are. So thank you for this process. I know that my biggest advice to families that are considering taking a break is, we want to see what's possible within this. You're already within this fight. We just might not be at the finish line where we want to be, but we know that there's bigger improvements to come. And this is part of my experience, and I'll continue to share as we move through. I know we're just getting a little tight for time, so we'll kind of move through this quickly. We're right at the end here. How to approach teachers and advisors for more support. So never fear reaching out to us. Always ask for clarification. Ask how to support at home. We know that a lot of the students, and especially at first, we are working towards independence. And that's to this point of speak to make a plan to increase towards independence and integrity. But to get to that point, sometimes there is additional help that's needed, just to keep them moving. And we see students that make the most progress really have a little bit more of that support. So just ask how you can support, how you can work with the teacher. You can ask for additional support in class to see. We often don't want to interrupt as we're building more independence. We try to start to back off with support to build that up. But if you're seeing that's still really a big need, we're happy to put more support in. But you might see that more than we see it because you're seeing them once the camera turns off and we move to a different student. We're still watching the data, we're still watching the chats, but you might see a different side at that point. So please make us aware of that. Discuss the environment with your teachers and see like, hey, this is where they're sitting. Like, does this seem like a good spot? Is there any changes you would recommend? Discuss how to speak to your child to promote continued growth in the area. Like I was saying about using the same language. And behavior, good or bad, is just a way for a human to show a met or unmet need. So discuss this with your teacher or advisor, and behaviors that noticing that we may have insights as to how and what need this could be exposing. It's the brain's, our emotions are the brain's way of sharing kind of how we're feeling without us having to say it. So it can speak 1,000 words, just one way of dealing with a situation. And we've seen a lot of students go through this, and we're happy to kind of chat through what you're experiencing to see if we can come up with any help or support.
I was going to say, we've pretty much seen it all. There's not much that you're going to bring up that we haven't either experienced ourselves, or that either, you know, Josh or Jenna and some of the other instructors that have been with us for a while would have seen. And so we welcome any questions or any information that you're willing to share with us.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for watching and joining. And we look forward to meeting again next month. But after watching, if you please book a meeting with us. I'll put our links back into the link that I've sent out. So if you're watching this, you should have a link to meet if you wanted to chat, or just through email is fine as well. So thank you again, and we'll see you throughout the month or at this presentation next month.
Thank
Thanks so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Very well done. Good information.